Hey everybody, hope and pray that you're doing well today as we come to our word from the Word. And today that word is precise. Precise. Now I know having some boys that are kind of working in precision machinery and that type thing, and I know it's a growing thing in industries that is needed. But to think about how precise some of those things have to be is quite amazing. Machining parts and just how tight the tolerance is on what it can be. But have you ever thought about the tolerance in God's will? Have you ever thought about how precise the will of God must be? To every little detail, to the smallest of points. Now, just with that thought in mind, if you get to Genesis 48 and you see that Joseph has a way that he thinks things are supposed to be. Now, I believe when you look back over his life, he probably had thoughts like this many times where he thought, okay, well, man, God gave me this dream. This is what it's going to be like. Man, my family's going to bow down. And then as he was, out there going to give a report, going to get a report for his father on his brothers, he probably thought he had a way. He knew the will of God for what that report was going to look like. And then when they basically threw him in a pit, pretended that he was dead, and let Jacob, his father, believe all that, I imagine that while he was in the pit, he had a way it was going to work out. When he was in the prison, he had a way it was going to work out. When he was a slave, when he was a prisoner, all these things, he had ways in his mind, and even being second in command, probably had ways that he thought God's will was going to be worked out. And then even with his sons, and that's what we find in Genesis 48, as Jacob is about to die. And he brings the boys in there. Joseph brings the boys, and again, I encourage you to read the whole chapter so you can see the whole scene. But he comes to bring the boys near, and he says, look, I want to bless these two sons as my own. After these, Joseph, what you have after this, they will be yours, but these will be mine. They'll be counted among mine. And he goes to bless them, and at this point he can't see. He's having a difficult time seeing. And so as he goes to bless them, he crosses his hands, and he basically gives what Joseph would see as he blesses the wrong child first. So the right hand would go on the older son, and the left hand would go on the younger. But Jacob, or Israel, switches the hands. Now, he hears the prayer, the blessing on these sons, and then Joseph says, wait a minute. And notice what happens. That's where we're going to pick it up. Genesis 48, verses 17 through 19 today. Now, when Joseph saw that his father laid his right hand on the head of Ephraim, it displeased him. So he took hold of his father's hand to remove it from Ephraim's head to Manasseh's head. And Joseph said to his father, not so, my father, for this one is the firstborn. Put your right hand on his head. But his father refused and said, I know, my son, I know. He also shall become a people, and he also shall be great. But truly his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his descendants shall become a multitude of nations. Something as precise as which son, or grandson in this case, received the blessing, or the greater blessing. As much as, and I do laugh a little bit that Joseph doesn't really say anything after that. That he says, basically, this is it. That's how it's going to be. And you can almost imagine Joseph like, okay, well, nothing else has worked out in the way that I planned. So I guess why should this be any different? Now, I say that not to say that we should have that attitude in a wrong way, but there are times when God has shown us that just how precise his will is, and we don't realize it. And we'll argue with him. No, Father. No, Father, you're blessing the wrong child. No, Father, you're blessing the wrong path. No, Father, you're blessing and you've got it mixed up. But see, God doesn't mix things up. And God had already told Jacob God had already told Israel what it was supposed to be. And which child, in this like prophecy on his deathbed of which child was going to be greater than the other. How else would he know it but God? So now God is even speaking that truth through Jacob, through Israel, to Joseph to let him know what was going to happen. He had already kind of told him about some of the fulfillment, that what was going to be fulfilled, the promises that he'd heard from God. I love some of the last words that we see from Jacob are reiterating the words of God, reiterating the promises of God, reiterating the plan of God, as we talked about yesterday. But here today, I think we need to understand too just how precise the will of God is, down to even the smallest of decisions, the smallest of things. I think at times we take it to only be the big picture. And I think sometimes if you try to say, well, yeah, but I know God has given us a brain, right? God has given us a brain to think with, and to use, right? He didn't just put it there as a hat rack, right? That's what I used to hear all the time. It's not just a hat rack, use that brain for something, use that head for some thinking. But I think we also need to realize that God has also laid a path before us, a precise path. Yes, there are times where we get off of it. Yes, there are times where we stray from where He desired for us to be. But one of the great things about the sovereignty of God is that even our mess ups, even our mistakes are kind of, as to go back to the precise thing, are still within the tolerance of His will, because He's already accounted for them. He's already accounted for the missteps that we would make. He had already accounted for, in this case, He had already accounted for what was going to happen in the future. He had already accounted for which son, which grandson, which nation was going to be greater, which number of descendants were going to be greater. And so He was using that. God was using all of these things to display His precise will. No matter how much Joseph could argue, we cannot argue with the will of God. We want to. We try to. Quite honestly, we do it quite often. But that doesn't mean it's right. I don't want you to have the attitude that, well, it doesn't matter what I do, God's will is going to be done anyway. Because Scripture teaches us otherwise. Why else would we need to pray? He already knows. But He tells us to pray anyway. Why else would we worry about these things? That's some of the issues you get in with the Calvinism way of thought. Well, it's not going to matter anyway. But yes, it does. It does, because God has told us what we ought to do. And we need to be obedient to it. But I also want you to understand that as you take each step with faith and with prayer. Take each step, because His will is that precise, that every step of the way we ought to be praying. Not that, okay, well, I'm going to take 10 steps and then ask God to bless those 9 I just took while I'm standing here in the midst of trouble. No, we take each step according to the will of God. That's how our lives need to be focused on His will, and how close of a relationship we need to be with Him. So today, how precise is your walk? God bless you, and I pray you have a great, great day.